across almost all age groups and demographics, it's via email that people say that they prefer to be communicated with by businesses. So email marketing is a bit of a no-brainer when it comes to your customer communication strategy. Email marketing has also been proven to deliver around 21 times its original investment. So it's a great piece of value for money way of getting from your marketing. That makes sense. And it's also been found that, I'm going to start this again.
Fine.
Do it. Okay, so why are we here? Well, we're talking about email marketing today because essentially everyone prefers emails. Across almost all age groups and demographics, it's been found that customers prefer to be communicated.
So, good afternoon everybody, thank you all for coming today. We're still waiting for a couple of other people to turn up, but I think we'll start because I know a lot of people are probably on tight deadlines and need to get back to offices. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mark McDonough, I'm Head of Client Services here at SuperDream, and I'd like to welcome you all to our 6th Lunch and Learn Inbox Unlocked. So over the next 30 minutes you've got Jayne and Ellie. We'll be telling you everything you need to know about email marketing, so how to make your emails work harder, what's really effective, but also how to get across those common problems that everyone has with emails, and also to talk about some of the big data challenges that are coming down the tracks towards everybody in the next couple of years. We like these sessions to be interactive, so please ask lots of questions. When we did the rehearsal yesterday, I asked loads and got on their nerves, so please ask lots of questions. And there's a questionnaire on your chairs if you could fill in during the actual course of the presentation. And obviously at the end we've got a nice lunch to balance off the lunch and learn bit, so there's a nice lunch next door at the end of the session. So please enjoy, ask questions, and I'll hand you over to Ellie and Jayne. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And well, welcome everyone to Inbox Unlocked. As Mark said, this is where we're going to be talking you through how to take email marketing to the next level. So I'm Jayne Scarman, I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at SuperDream.
And I'm Elanor Edwards, I'm a Digital Account Manager. You might have noticed we're quite similar, same glasses, same hair. We're so similar, we even prepared a Venn diagram for the occasion. Those of you who do know us well will know that we actually had to coordinate yesterday or risk turning up in the same outfit. Those of you who don't know us yet will see that we have quite a similar presenting style. So I'm sorry if that gets too distracting, especially now I've pointed it out. But maybe spot the difference. Who knows?
Yeah, enjoy doing that as we go through. So why are we here today? Well, we're talking about email marketing because essentially everyone loves an email. Across almost all age groups and demographics, consumers say that they prefer companies to be in touch with them via email over any other communication method. So it's a bit of a no-brainer when it comes to your customer communication strategy. It's also been proven to deliver 21 times the return on the original investment, so it really provides great value for money. And then last of all, 90% of customers say that they will actually subscribe to a brand that they trust. So if you have a fully opted-in database, you know you're talking to people who really care about your organisation.
But there are challenges. 50 to 75% of emails sent is classed as spam by the person receiving it. And what's classed as spam is actually changing. With email spam filters getting so good these days at picking out your common garden variety spam, such as your Nigerian princes, spam is really being redefined as what the user is expecting to receive. So any kind of email that's irrelevant, unwanted, or unexpected will be spammed by your user. You can see here there's a really wide range of things that people will spam an email for. But for instance, 45% of people will spam your email if they've had a bad experience with your customer services, which is obviously nothing to do with that individual email you've sent. So you have to start thinking about the bigger picture of the relationship your subscriber has with you as a brand. And in conjunction with the kind of data changes we're seeing with the GDPR, your emails just have to keep getting better and better to really pass muster.
So today we're going to be covering how good are your emails, so looking at what can make email marketing perform well and how you would measure that. We'll look at the database side of things and how to keep that in tip-top condition. Then we're going to run through a few email fails where even the big boys got it spectacularly wrong. It can happen to any of us. Then we'll do a roundup of some of the legalities, particularly focusing on the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming into force in 2018, and we're going to focus specifically on how that's going to affect email marketing. And then we'll finish off with some final tips on making your emails work even harder, and then some techniques you might want to include in the not so distant future.
But in true Super Dream style, we are going to make you work a little bit for your lunch. You should have on your handout a list of 7 easy questions about how your email marketing is performing at the moment. If you could all just take 30 seconds for me and fill that out now, then hopefully this should give you at the end of the session a really good idea of where your strengths are and where you might need to improve as well. Okay, everyone good? Hopefully you've been as honest as possible. So, how good are your emails? Rhetorical question, don't worry, I'm not going to put you on the spot. We should probably start with how you measure them. Measurement for email marketing tends to fall into these 3 categories. Positive engagement is your opens, clicks and shares. Clicks can be measured in terms of click to open rate, which is the percentage of people who opened an email who also clicked. Versus click-through rate, which is the percentage of people that you sent to who clicked, which is obviously going to be a bit of a smaller number. Negative engagement is your unsubscribes and your complaints. And finally, we have deliverability. This is usually tracked in terms of bounces. You have soft bounces and hard bounces. Hard bounces are the lost causes, the uncontactable, invalid email addresses who you can't talk to anymore. Soft bounces can be caused by a number of different things. They could be up to your recipient, they could have a full mailbox, but it's also down to you as the email sender as well, whether you're sending you're falling into spam filters, things like that. We're going to talk about deliverability a little bit later on, but we should first probably figure out what's a good open rate and what's a good bounce rate. Unfortunately, it's actually quite difficult to put a flag in the ground on this one. It can be quite unique to you, but it's definitely worth familiarising yourself with the industry you operate in. On the back of your handout, you should have a full list of all the industries that are commonly tracked as part of email benchmarking. So if you want to find yourself on there and compare, but if you can see on the screen here, the highest open rate we've got is 28% and the lowest we've got 16. So it does vary wildly on your industry because your industry will be dependent on your target audience and the way they receive email is very unique to them. So it's really worth keeping track of how you're performing and comparing yourself against your peers as you go forward.
Which leads us on then to how do we go about maximising that positive engagement that we want, where we want people to click and read and open our emails. And there's a few different tactics for doing this. The first thing is around thinking about the customer first, fairly common sense, I'm sure you'll agree. Think about what is it that you already know about your customer, what is it that you think they might like to receive, what kind of content would interest them, and is there anything in your database and the information that you hold on them that could help you to decide that. So to give you an example, if you send out a promotion for an offer of something that your customers already bought, that's going to turn them right off, as I'm sure it would all of us. Similarly, if you're sending out an email about your services for the aerospace industry and it's going to people who are working in the automotive industry, it goes without saying they're not going to be interested, they're not going to open it, they're not going to click. So really try and mine your database to see whether that can give you some insights. You'd be surprised how much a job title, a company name, a location can actually tell you and then help you tailor your content. The next thing is around thinking about the full customer journey. So an email is going to be no good at all if it doesn't go anywhere. So you need to think about what you want your recipient to do as a result. So for example, if you want them to sign up to something, send them across to a sleek, quick to load landing page. It's got just the information they need, it doesn't distract them, and they're able to fulfill what you want them to do. And you want them to go away with a really positive experience. You don't want them to feel annoyed or irritated at a promise unfulfilled. Also, of course, in relation to that, make sure you check all the links in the email quite simply to make sure it actually goes somewhere. And then lastly, think about the trigger. So email marketing campaigns have been proven to work best when they relate to a pertinent point in time or another piece of communication. So for example, if you're sending a follow-up email after an event and you want feedback or to say thank you, it's of course best to do it a day or so afterwards, not a week later. Similarly, if you've perhaps got people to download some content from your website, if you follow that up then a couple of days later with an offer of more help or some extra freebies, then that's likely to be engaged with well. So if you consider all of those things, you're going to be maximising your chances of opening, clicking and getting that really positive engagement. But then on to how do we reduce our negative engagement? Well, there's a couple of areas here. The first of which is about relevance, which essentially is the inverse of everything I've just been talking about. If you're sending out content that is of no interest, you're going to get some of those negative engagement signals. And you really want to avoid those, because the more that people don't open, don't click, perhaps even mark you as spam, you run the risk of being placed on a blacklist and finding it more difficult to send later on, which is something Ellie's going to talk through a bit later. Also think about the timing. I'm sure, as you know yourselves, if you get repeat emails from the same person or the same company every day, you're quickly going to get bored and you're going to unsubscribe. The same goes for the content that goes in there and not repeating yourself. Try to avoid that very generic blanket content. You want to be as tailored as possible, and we're going to be talking you through some tips to do that. And then the final thing is actually about display. And so this is something that often gets overlooked, but it's actually a really crucial factor, because I don't know whether you're aware, there's up to 15,000 different potential renderings of an email, i.e. it can potentially be seen 15,000 different ways by people who receive it. And this could be subtle or it could be not so subtle differences. So to give you some examples of the kind of things we see, Gmail and Apple will often change the fonts of an email. So you might have created it beautifully, it looks beautiful, but when it comes through, it's all misaligned. Similarly, Outlook, that will only show the first frame of an animated GIF. So if you want to put some great animation in your emails, chances are it won't work in Outlook. Outlook tends to strip out images as well. And then something like Hotmail will get rid of bulleted lists all over. Furthermore, if an email doesn't work on a smartphone, it's been shown that 43% of people are actually going to delete it. So it really is crucial that you test your emails before they go out for all of the different renderings to see what it might look like in different email clients. Now, you can do that using an automated tool such as something like Litmus, which will test across different email clients. Or you can do it quite simply on your phone, on other people's computers, to see how it's looking. But it's really important that that's something you do, as you're going to see from some of the email fails we'll talk through in a bit. It can go quite wrong. What I would say though is don't get too hung up on fixing every single error in every single client, because you have potentially got 15,000 variations. So assess what your database uses most often and how important the error is. So for example, if a very small proportion of your recipients use Gmail and the error is simply that the font is one size bigger than it should be, you're probably fine. But if it's not displaying at all on a smartphone, that's probably something you really want to look to fix.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of deliverability. As I've mentioned, this is something that you can't always affect yourself. Sometimes the recipient has temporary server issues or problems with their email domain, or indeed a full mailbox, which means you won't be able to get through to them. But there are some things you can do at your end to reduce the number of bounces you get and maximise your chances of ending up in someone's inbox. The first thing is regarding email quality. This really follows on from what Jayne was talking about around testing. If your email is high quality and coded correctly, it's more likely to end up in someone's inbox. But there are some things you can do around content as well. There's a blacklist of terms that might end up with you in a spam filter. For instance, you might want to avoid saying the word free 10 times in your email, because that looks spammy to the server, the inbox that's receiving it. You might also want to consider image to text ratio. There's some mixed advice on what to do with this, but essentially it goes that you should have as much readable text in your email as possible, avoiding text that is placed on a flat image as part of a JPEG, because the more images you have in your email, the lower the chances of it being delivered. As I say, this is a little bit in debate. Some people say it doesn't affect deliverability too much, but we would recommend that you do this where possible. Now we get to the complicated bit, which is database cleanliness and sender reputation. These two are very, very much interlinked. If you have bad data, it will affect your sender reputation. If you have bad data in the first place, then as you send the email, you will get a high level of bounces, of low levels of engagement, low opens, low clicks. That will make you look like a spammy sender, like people don't want to receive your email. If you look like a spammy sender, you will get a worse sender reputation. And if your sender reputation is bad, they will make it less likely for you to be delivered in an inbox the next time you send. So if you get a bad sender reputation, you're actually less likely to get through in the future to the people who are actually interested in hearing from you. So you can see how it becomes a bit of a vicious circle, and one thing sort of adds to another. You have to really watch your data. You have to keep your database clean, you have to keep it correctly formatted, and finally you have to maximise your chances by collecting the right data in the first place. Which brings us on to how good is your database. The art of data collection is very much the art of knowing what information you can trade for the service or information you're providing in return. Most of you will be aware that an e-newsletter often only just asks for your email address in order to subscribe. Often in B2C and clothing brands and fashion brands, that's the way it works. But if you're offering a key piece of information, an offer, an incentive, an invite, then you can probably trade for a little bit more information from the person subscribing. However, you want to make sure that you're only storing data that's actually going to be useful to you. For instance, lots of B2C companies will ask you for your birthday so that they can send you nice little birthday messages, offers, incentives, and things like that. But as a B2B company, that's probably going to put your customers off. So you've got to think about who you're talking to and how they're going to receive that request for data. And this is why it's important to think ahead, not just next month's newsletter, but the product launch you've got coming up 6 months down the line, or the big event you've got coming up. What data will you need for that piece of communication? And that's where making sure that you're collecting not just a full name, but a first name and a last name, for instance, so that you can do some nice personalisation would be quite useful. And you need to make sure that all of your form fields are mandatory, so that you haven't only got data for half of your list, which isn't very helpful in the long run. But this does verge on how you collect your data, which we've broken down into 4 easy steps for you. The first one is getting that form right. You need to ask for a proportionate amount of data and ask for the subscriber's information at a point in time where it's relevant to them and they're engaged in you as a brand. You need to sell in why people should subscribe. What's the benefit to them of subscribing to your e-newsletter? And finally, you need to set some expectations. How often are you going to talk to them? What are you going to talk to them about? Just a line in your form will make all the difference in setting these kind of expectations for your users. Secondly, we've got authenticating that data. Most of you will have experienced 2-step verification at some point as a consumer. It goes something like this. You'll subscribe. They'll say, we'll send you an email address to verify your email. You get that email, click on a button, and then, and only then, are you added to their subscriber list. As an email sender, this is really, really powerful for you. You can immediately authenticate that this person is using their active, valid email address, and the bad data never actually makes it to your database in the first place. And then we have saying hello. So make sure you send welcome emails. Welcome emails are your big chance to make a good first impression. They're 4 times more likely to be opened and 5 times more likely to be clicked. So you can make the most of this by asking people to whitelist your email address, for instance, add it to their address book so that you're more likely to get through. Or you could even ask them for a little bit more information about themselves, a little bit more subscriber information to add to your database. And finally, we have living up to your promises. Those expectations you set out, you have to live up to them. You've defined this relationship and how you're going to talk to your subscribers. So often this is the most difficult thing to accomplish, but it really is vital in terms of the long-term engagement of every single person on your database.
So that covers the collecting of data, but it's also important that you give your database a little bit of TLC as you're using it over the months. Because you might not be aware that databases and data actually decay at around 35% a year. So that means that every 12 months you're losing around a third of your subscribers because they've moved on, they've changed their email address, or they're just not interested anymore. However, all is not lost, and there are some techniques you can use to rejuvenate that database again. So the first one is actually around having a spring clean. So if you're seeing lots of soft bounces coming through all of the time, remove those from your database. If people aren't engaging with your email, you're going to be damaging that sender reputation, as Ellie was talking about. So remove them. Then you can try and update that list. So particularly if you're working in a B2B market, if you take a look at those soft bounces, it might be that that person in the organisation has moved on and someone has replaced them. So go in and do your research. Do some digging on LinkedIn, look in the trade press, research on the company website, and then you can go and make an individual approach to them to see if they would be interested in hearing from you. But don't just go and add them to the database, as that is going to be illegal under the GDPR, which we'll be talking about shortly. Then what you might want to do is run some sort of re-engagement campaign. So you can look at that portion of your database that perhaps is receiving your emails but isn't opening them or isn't clicking through, and send them a specific campaign asking whether they'd be interested in still hearing from you. Now you might have received these yourselves. I know I have, particularly from like clothing websites where I might have reacted to an offer at one point and then I don't. So they've been in touch to see am I still interested in them and do I still want to hear from them. So this can be a really effective tool. And if they say yes, they do still want to hear from you, then fantastic. You have a really engaged subscriber there that you want to continue talking to. If they say no, obviously respect their wishes, take them out of your database. And if they don't say anything at all, take them out as well, because they're not engaging with your email marketing, and that's going to go on and hurt that sender reputation again. So remove them. If they do decide they're interested in you further down the line, they will resubscribe, I promise you. And then lastly, you might then want to seek out some new data, because having done this cleansing exercise, you're probably going to be left with a much smaller database than you had, which is a bit of a scary prospect, isn't it? However, that database you do have is fully engaged, so that's a really powerful tool to market to. But if you want to go out and seek some new data, you can do that, of course, by adding a form to your website, or perhaps refreshing the one that's currently on there. You can do data collection at events. You might even want to produce some kind of unique, desirable piece of content that people will be willing to part with their email address for in order to obtain. And you can do that research that I was talking about on LinkedIn to try and find new subscribers. But most importantly of all, do not, by any account, buy any data, and you will find out why shortly.
So before we get into the hard-hitting stuff about the GDPR, I thought we'd have a little bit of light relief with some email campaigns that have gone a bit wrong.
So we're going to start with Google. Yes, even Google themselves can get this wrong. This is an example of an email that hasn't been tested before it went out, and it hasn't rendered properly when it came through. And you probably can't really see, which is kind of the point. There's some very, very small white text on here on a very light background, which can't be read. And there were links in all of these areas and none of them worked. So it just goes to show the importance of actually testing something before it goes out.
Our next example is from Starbucks. They've had to send an apology email because they were a little bit trigger happy and sent out their spring menu to their subscribers before it was actually available in Starbucks shops. Apology emails like this are probably the right way to go. A little bit of humour, got like an oops, we pressed send too soon in the subject line there. A little bit of humour and humility can make the most out of these situations. So probably the right approach from Starbucks, even though they made a mistake.
Then we have an example from Arriva Trains, and this is a bit of personalisation that hasn't gone well, because at the beginning here it's been addressed to the person's surname rather than their first name, which shows that they haven't got their data in order before they sent out this particular email.
This is an example of why user journey is so important in keeping track of user journey. Some of us at Superdream attended a discovery morning for email marketing with a lovely bunch in London called Sign Up To last year. Really great session. So when they sent through an email earlier on this year, about 6 months later, saying we've got a new email benchmark report out, do you want to download it? We went straight to do that, and unfortunately received an automated email in response to that download inviting us back to the same event. So obviously they're not keeping track of past attendees, which is a really little gap in the loop that you need to watch for.
And then we have an example from Jayne Malone, which frankly is just plain wrong, as it says there. So this email is supposed to be introducing perhaps a new line of products, but what they've done is they've actually attached the HTML version of the email to the email. All it says is newsletter attached. You have this spammy looking link here, and that's the point. That looks like spam, doesn't it? So you're not going to react well from that, and it's not what you expect from a big brand.
And finally, sometimes we have to put up our hands and say that Superdream aren't perfect either, I'm afraid. I'd like to introduce you all to the lovely medium lizard. For one of our clients, they have a very particular problem between the way that emails encode URLs to track them in our email send software and their website. The website grabs a tiny little bit of the URL rather than all of it, and for some reason, God help us, we don't know why, in a lot of our test emails, it redirects every link to the medium lizard. We have no idea why this happens. Thankfully, it's always something that we're checking for and testing and catching before it ever makes it out of the door. But we took it as a sign and decided that the account manager for Cooks needed a little medium lizard of her own, so we bought one for the office. So back down to earth with a bump to talk about the GDPR. I'm sure you're all quite aware of the heightened sense of awareness around data privacy and data protection at the moment, especially when it comes to digital communication and digital privacy. Whether this is internet service providers and what they can track about you and your behavioural habits, or in this case, how we use emails for marketing communications. The General Data Protection Regulations, it is a mouthful, is a piece of EU legislation which will come into effect in May 2018. It's designed to formalise some fairly common sense rules about data protection. The idea is privacy by design, protecting the privacy and the data of the individual. Personally identifiable data will be affected. So emails count as this. Interestingly enough, cookies also count as this. So it's quite an interesting one for digital marketers of any kind. However, today we are going to just talk about how this is affecting email marketing, collecting data for email marketing and using that data. So we've got some facts for you. In terms of collection, you have to have explicit affirmative permission. We define permission as the privilege to talk to someone, not the right to talk to someone. So those annoying pre-checked boxes you get on newsletter subscription forms will be illegal after the GDPR comes in. You'll also have to split out your terms and conditions, general terms and conditions, and the ones you use for your data privacy. And you'll have to be open about any third parties that will have access to that data at the point of collection. You must obtain data via a sale or sale negotiation. So this is any kind of personal interaction or one-on-one interaction with a subscriber, whether that's a sale through a website, meeting someone at events, over-the-counter customer services, that kind of thing, over the phone. You must have had a personal interaction with that person though, which essentially means you cannot buy data. By doing this, the EU is really catching up to other countries. For instance, America already considers it illegal for you to buy and use third-party data. So it's something to really consider. It's coming that way anyway across the entire world. When you come to use that data, there's a couple of things that you'll have to include in every single communication. You'll have to include an opt-out or an unsubscribe link in every single communication, and at the point of collection as well. Most email send software will do this for you, so it's not something you have to worry about too much. But you do also have to include your company name and your registered address in every single communication you put out as well. One rule that I think will have a really big impact is that there is some information in there about how you cannot use data if you haven't had a transaction with someone in the last 12 months. Transaction is a little bit woolly here. I think looking at this in the conjunction with the first slide about data collection, the way they've defined negotiation, sale negotiation, this for me is having some kind of two-way communication with the client. It doesn't specify a financial transaction. As long as you're communicating and getting interaction from your customers, I'm sure it'll be fine. Not only do you have to prove consent for the data you've collected from 2018 onwards, you will also have to keep backdated proof of consent for anyone you are still contacting whose data you collected prior to 2018. This is a really, really big deal, but most email send software, again, will have this data in it if you've been using it over a longer period of time. I know some of you will be working with agencies on email marketing, so this is where we really have to work collaboratively and work together to make sure all of the boxes are ticked and we're following all of the rules, because obviously as agencies we handle some of your data. The penalties are pretty substantial. 4% of turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is greater, that's the penalty for unrepentant sinners who have no remorse and are not making any attempts to change their data privacy rules. So really something to think about. And if you think these kind of fines won't be levied, you only have to look at the recent fines that have been placed against Google and Microsoft for similar kinds of data protection breaches. I'm seeing a little glimmer of hope somewhere around Brexit, but I just wanted to stamp that one on the head because these rules apply based on the recipient's location. So if you're sending from the UK and someone has the chance of receiving the email in the EU, even after Brexit has happened, then these rules will apply. You will need to be compliant. And to be honest, these rules are best practice in a lot of places already, even if they're not actually in law. So this is your chance to get ahead of yourselves and get ahead of the game and be compliant for any future UK legislation which is bound to come around in the next couple of years.
Okay, so we've covered how to get the content of your email right, we've covered the database side of things, and we've covered the legalities. So now what I want to share with you is some extra tips on how to make your email marketing work even harder. So the first one we're going to talk about is personalisation. Now I'm sure you're all familiar with this already and know about the benefits of it. It's been shown that personalised emails are 26%, bless you by the way, 26% that's fine, 26% more likely to be opened and 2.5 times more likely to be clicked on, and can generate up to 6 times more sales. And as marketeers, while generally we are aware of the benefits of this, a recent survey has shown that actually only around half of us are using personalisation on a regular basis in our email marketing. So I definitely think it's something to think about. Now, you can personalise pretty much anything in an email. You can do who it's from, the recipient's name, text, images, even whole swathes of content. You can tailor according to how you've segmented your database. And the information that you hold on people is key to you being able to do that. And in order to get the data for you to be able to personalise, you can do that in your sign-up form, of course, but you could also add to that by sending out a survey to your subscribers, or by bringing together your email marketing database and your CRM, and then you're really harnessing the power of your customer data. And we have an example from Worcester here. So this is a welcome email that's sent out to people who sign up to their Green Star Rewards programme, and this features a lot of personalisation. It has the from field personalised, so it goes to the recipient's individual technical sales manager. It obviously has the recipient's name, that sales manager's name appears, and there's a unique customer identifier in there as well as the contact details for that particular sales manager. So we've used a lot of personalisation techniques here, and it's showing really good results because typically these are opened anywhere between 45 and 70% of the time, which is really excellent for this particular industry. Then the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about was tracking. So tracking gives you insight into what the recipients of your emails are doing. Now we've talked about some of the simple measures such as click-through rates and open rates, but tracking is about actually hooking up your email sends with your Google Analytics data. And most email send programs will enable you to do this through UTM tracking. And I've got an example here from Superdream, which will show you how this works. So the UTM tracking has enabled us to isolate people who came in from a specific email when they are browsing on our website, which is what we can see here. And this then gives me a whole other level of information about the people who've received that email. So to give you an example, people who came in on a story about email marketing predictions generally were quite new to Superdream and the Superdream website. So 60% of them were brand new on the Superdream website when they clicked on that story. Conversely, a story about recruiting the perfect account manager only had about 30% new people. So that attracted people who already knew us better. So that's already showing us quite an interesting difference in content. What I can also see is people who came in on the homepage generally spent up to 6 minutes on the site and viewed lots of pages, where on either of those two stories they just visited for a short amount of time. So they came on, they read the story quickly, they left again. So it shows us some interesting patterns about how they're behaving from our emails that can then help us tailor what goes in those emails in the future, and also which emails we send to different portions of our database, which is something Ellie's going to talk about in a bit more detail now.
At Superdream, we really like tactics that reduce the amount of blanket email we've sent. You've probably got bored of us saying relevant content, targeted content, specific content. All of you should be able to do a little bit more segmentation than you think. Already, you should be able to tailor your content based on whether someone reads all of your email marketing or only a single strand of it. That your email send software should have some of that information in it. But when we talk about preferences and segmentation, we also mean user-led preferences and segmentation. Asking people what they want to read, how often they want to read it, and that kind of information. Often, just asking one question when someone signs up will make all the difference to your engagement and your open rates. For instance, if you owned a website that sold supplies for hen parties, you could ask whether the person subscribing was the bride or whether they were someone organising the hen party. And that would completely change the kind of content and products that you might send to those two people. So it makes all the difference when you actually send it out on what and how people are going to behave and react to that email. One example that we've done for one of our clients is the Ashida blog. This is the subscription form for the blog, which was launched about 8 months ago. We send a monthly targeted email surrounding the content that those people are interested in. So we ask them for their name, their email address, their company, and then the food sectors that they're interested in, which means that when they receive the content, it's only what they're interested in, it's their area of expertise. And these emails get really, really good open rates of 35 to 45%, which is above industry average. The next thing I wanted to talk about is automation. This is where you identify key touch points in your digital user journey, and you set up some little triggers for behaviour and activities, user actions that might send out an automated email. So it's really taking behavioural profiling kind of to the next level. Common email triggers are, well, we've already mentioned some. Subscription would result in a welcome email. Abandoned baskets, I'm sure you've all had some of those, reminding you what you were trying to purchase, and sometimes if you're Amazon, offering you a little 10% discount, like those. Purchases, confirming what you've purchased. RSVPs, confirming the time of the event. It's this sort of thing, and for some companies, any sign of life will do. If someone has opened an email, then talk to them again, and if someone's clicked, then good God, talk to them every single day. But one example I've had personally is from TripAdvisor. So they saw me browsing for a holiday cottage in the Loire Valley. So they helpfully sent me an email of all of the holiday cottages I'd looked at. And then when I booked one through their app, they then sent me confirmation details of what I'd booked. And they then started to send me little ideas about day trips that I might want to go on. You can see that I'm getting a lot of emails by this point. And finally, and unfortunately this was the nail in the coffin, they sent me an email asking me to review the holiday cottage that I hadn't actually gone to yet. even though they knew when I booked it for. They were able to do this because they could link me up via the app. I was using their app, so they could link me to my email address and send me relevant content. So you can see how it would be really positive for good engagement, getting people to open, getting people to click, building up a relationship with them. But it can be really positive for negative engagement as well. If you can see that someone hasn't responded to an email for 3 months, 5 months, you can set up a little rule to automatically put them into a rejuvenation list. So as we spoke about earlier, you can define that and say, do you still want to talk to us? What do you want to hear? What would you prefer to hear from us? All of this can be accomplished through email send software.
Which takes us through to the final section of emails of the not so distant future. So this is some trends that we're seeing at the moment, which might be quite interesting for you to incorporate into your campaigns. And the first one is about interactivity. So this is an example from Domino's, which I know is probably going to make you really hungry, but we're nearly at lunch, so don't worry. So what you get is you get an empty pizza board, and then when you hover over some of the different options, the picture of the pizza appears, a description of what's on it, and then you can click through in order to order one as well. Which is a really fun and interactive way of launching a new menu. It's much more exciting than sending someone through to a PDF, for example. Then our next example, and this didn't work very well earlier, so fingers crossed, is of e-commerce actually within an email, where you can actually browse through products, pick a size, pick a colour, and then go on and buy it straight from within the body of the email without having to go anywhere else. I've filled as long as I did earlier.
It's not going to work
You
for
might
us,
have
is
to
it?
take my word for that one. Well, we can send a link round with some examples to play with if you like.
Oh, just as it loads.
I know, almost did it.
And finally, we have some good news for any techies or developers in the room. Outlook is the most difficult email client to test for. Unfortunately, because it's so popular with B2B, you have to learn to love it. Our developers experience lots of challenges trying to get this to work consistently across all the different versions of Outlook that are commonly used across the whole of the EU. But there is hope. Microsoft have recognised the issues that this causes for marketers, and they're actually now working with Litmus, the email testing software, to try and eliminate some of the rendering issues that make our lives difficult. So, we're going to stop talking now, but I would be interested if everyone can just reflect for 10 seconds on their scores and see how they feel now that we've talked at you for half an hour.
And is there anything that you might change now that you've heard our presentation that you might do differently?
Should we ask for a cheeky hands up for would you score yourselves better? Or would you score yourselves worse, maybe? It looked like some of you were being quite hard on yourselves anyway, to be fair. So anyway, we hope you found that really, really informative. And does anyone have any questions? You can catch us afterwards. We'll be hanging around if you don't want to ask in front of everyone. But yes, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.